Vince, I want to start with the defense tonight because we started with the offense last night on our post-game show. I want to start with the defense because
sounds good.
I have come to two very strong conclusions about the game plan last night. Number one is I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. It's just something that I wouldn't have done. It's not the game plan I would have gone with. I would have liked to see a more aggressive attacking defense. I would have liked to see them turn the defensive line loose. At the same time, I came away with the conclusion of I get what they were trying to do, and it worked.
It did.
At the end of the day, Vince, they held USC to their lowest point total since September of 2019.
Right.
Second lowest point yards total, I believe, of the season, I believe. And it was one of those things where I just felt like it wasn't what I personally would have done, but I really can't criticize it too much because
it wasn't pretty.
You lost Kyle Hamilton.
Right.
Early.
That's huge. And people need to remember that.
Right. And number two, I get it because you have to look at schemes. You have to look at opponent specific. And the reality is I wrote about this and real quick, we have a couple super chats that we will get to. I promise.
Yes. I'm sitting on the first one, so I don't lose it
because it's about recruiting and we'll get to that. But for me, Vince, it's what I come down to is this: what is the end game? What's the objective? Is the objective to be sexy, as you mentioned? Is the objective to hold them to 250 yards and have 12 tackles for loss and 5 sacks?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the objective to keep their points down? And as I wrote in my key takeaways after the game, Vince, I came to two realizations that I believe Marcus Freeman came to and his staff came to watching USC. One, USC's dangerous in certain areas to rip off big plays.
Sure.
Number two, they're an incredibly undisciplined football team that will shoot themselves in the foot if you give them enough opportunities. The one thing you can't do to a team like that is let them rip off big plays and cheap points. And that's something you and I talked about leading up to the game.
Right.
And I feel like they went with the thought of, this isn't really what I like, but we have to avoid giving up the big play.
Right.
And there was the 20-20 game plan, and then there was the red zone game plan.
Right.
The red zone game plan is exactly what I wanted to see all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But why did they do that? Because it was okay, they can't rip off a big play at the 18.
Exactly. Right. And everything's more condensed. There is no big play.
How did you see all that, Vince? Did you?
As far as like, I agree with you.
Did you see it that way? I mean, what did you think of the overall game plan and why? And do you think it was right and all that kind of stuff?
I understand why they did it. I mean, look, I said that I thought that that's maybe the way that they're going to go about things on Thursday, and not necessarily that I agreed with it, but it was a plan in my head that made sense it will get them out of this game alive and with a win. Right? Like that was my thought process on the defensive strategy. I didn't necessarily have an issue with it. My issue more, I guess, was a little bit of lack of execution on a couple of plays. Mm-hmm. And I probably would have switched some things up when they started running the ball with such efficiency. But again, the plan that they had in place allowed them to run the football. Like unfortunately, in football, you can't necessarily stop everything, especially against a team like USC. And so you kind of pick your poison. And what they did is they kind of allowed – now, again, there were some execution and some missed tackles.
Yeah.
But they were basically telling USC, go ahead and run the ball and run the clock. That's not going to hurt us.
Because you know what happens every time they hand off to Keontae Ingram? They're not throwing it to Drake London.
Yeah, there was a point in the game where I think they had one first down by somebody that wasn't Drake London, and it was deep into the first half.
Right.
And he got his, and we told everybody he's going to get. Now, I would not have predicted what he did. From a stat, I would not have predicted as many yards and catches as he had.
But see, this is the thing we talked about before the show, Vince, is I don't care about his stats.
Exactly.
I said you can't let him take the game over, and he really didn't.
He didn't.
And part of it to me was the game plan is, look, he wants to catch and have a bunch of 6, 7, 8-yard gains. Go for it. I thought the two big plays he had a 29-yard gain in the first half. That was a mistake from Clarence Lewis. And he had a 44-yard gain in the second half. That was a mistake from Clarence Lewis that I think is one of the plays we absolutely would not have seen happen had Kyle Hamilton been in the game. That 44-yard post route, which they hit, does not happen if Kyle Hamilton's in the game.
Right.
In my
opinion. Agreed.
So to me, it was one of those things where they were willing to give up certain things. Because I'm saying, like, man, he's just catching hitches and under routes, and I think it was just one thing. Fine, catches. You want to catch a 6-yard gain?
It was that under stuff.
That's cool.
It was the under stuff,
right.
And that's why we said it was so important to tackle in space with him. And they didn't always do, and that was a fantastic job of that. I mean, he was more elusive than I thought he would be as far as breaking some tackles and things.
Well, there's also some really, for being honest, some piss poor technique.
I agree. But the key for me, if everybody's wants to bang Marcus Freeman and all that, there were guys there to make plays. So the scheme was sound, in my opinion. Yeah. It's just they have to execute it. You've got to finish, right? So that's more my issue. There was guys there to finish, they just didn't do it.
You know what's funny? It's one of the things that we often complain about with the offense at Notre Dame under Brian Kelly has been his stubbornness that I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do what we're going to do no matter what the opponent, no matter what my personnel is.
Yes,
and now we're criticizing Marcus Freeman for going away from what he believes in because he felt that gave them the best chance to keep the points down against USC, which is the ultimate goal of a defense.
Yes.
I just find that to be kind of funny. And I was thinking about that because I was getting really frustrated about the defensive game plan. And when I'm talking about criticizing people for having that view, I'm not talking about our fans. I'm talking about me.
Yeah, right.
I'm talking about, my thoughts on it. Because I'm like,
right.
Okay, I can't be a hypocrite here. I can't sit there and be like, I'm getting sick of, the offense. Just this, we're going to do what we do no matter what. And I'm like, well, that's exactly the opposite of what Marcus Freeman did.
Yeah,
he
that's
said,
true.
Yes, this is what I like. I want to be an aggressive, attacking, this kind of guy. But that puts us at risk against this team, like it did against Cincinnati, like it did against Florida State, because they have enough athletes to say, hey, let's go make this play. Let's go take this shot.
Because they were a nickel and dime a ton in the second half, a ton, which took linebackers off the field. And it was whether it's a 3-front or a 4-front, when you take linebackers off the field, it's not overly difficult to get run lanes established because you have no second level. And a lot of times, if there was a 3-front and there was one linebacker, they were bringing the linebacker, and so it was really taking away a second level. And so that was frustrating as well. But again, like you said, their whole goal was to not let USC get in the end zone on a consistent basis and from big plays, and they did that. I mean, both of their touchdowns. If I would have told you, hey, USC is going to score 2 touchdowns on the ground in this game, you'd have been like, great, no problem, and those will be their only 2 touchdowns. Great, sounds good. Right. You know what I mean? And that's what they ended up doing, and it worked out for them. So I think all in all, Marcus Freeman went to bed pretty happy. Now, he's always going to be a perfectionist.
I'll bet you he wasn't super happy.
Well, but you know what I mean.
Here's why I say that. He's going to be pleased with the result.
That's what I'm talking about.
But I kind of feel like if I'm Marcus Freeman, and I've been in this situation before, where you have success, but you almost feel kind of dirty because you didn't do it the way you wanted to do it. You're like, like it's kind of one of those things.
You want to go home and take a shower,
honestly. And I don't mean this to be disrespect to the current roster, because I think the kids on the team now are pretty good players. But it's one of those things where I cannot wait to get my recruits in here, so I can do this a different way. And honestly, I think that's again, when I think about that, and I thought about that when I was breaking down the film, I actually have to give Marcus Freeman props. I mean, this is where I had the biggest change in thought from last night to now. Was that's hard to go away from everything that's got you to Notre Dame.
Right.
You have to go away from, because honestly, that's just not what's best for us tonight with the players we have. And once Kyle Hamilton went out, I think he would have been foolish not to do that. I mean, and I hate saying that because I don't like that kind of defense. But honestly, this is no different than what Clark Lee did 2 years ago. I went back and watched some of the 2019 game today, Vince, just to kind of refresh my memory. Go watch that game. Look what he does with Julian Okwara the first 2 plays of that game. Lines him up on the edge and then drops him into coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the whole thing. It was bend but don't break. It was keep everything in front of you. And the difference is that when that defense allowed USC to get into the red zone in the second half, Notre Dame couldn't stop them in the second half. This team, for the most part, was able to come up with some stops until the very, very end. But this is what we saw before. It's look, the air raid. You're gonna get your yards. They're gonna 100%. Get their yards.
We told people that.
It's keep the points down, and that's exactly what they did. Again, I didn't love it. It's not sexy. It kind of makes me feel like, but it got, again, 16 points, lowest point total since September of 2019.
And I wonder if we would have seen a little bit more aggression if Kyle Hamilton was still in the game.
A little bit. I think.
What
we would have seen is more targeted attacks.
Yeah.
I think because they were mixing it up pretty good the first 2 series.
Right.
They were dropping 3, dropping 8, but they were mixing it up. They were bringing more, really early, they were bringing more stunts out of the 3-man fronts. They were bringing the linebackers on more crashes. So there were some times, even out of the 3-man fronts, where they were bringing 5 guys.
Right.
We didn't see a lot of that after Hamilton went down.
Because people have to understand that Kyle Hamilton can cover more ground than anybody on this team, more ground than anybody in the country. And so he can make up area that you vacate by bringing linebackers, right? So I want to make sure everybody understands that. So when he's not there anymore, and this is no disrespect to DJ Brown, because I thought he played about as well as he can play in relief of Kyle Hamilton, okay? But it would be foolish for Marcus Freeman to have the exact same game plan with DJ Brown in the game as you did with Kyle Hamilton. That's not smart. Okay.
Right.
And he adjusted. He adjusted and said, look, we need to be a little bit more conservative. We need to keep everything in front of us, and we'll take what they give us. And that's kind of what they did. Again, some execution issues that they need to get cleaned up, and we've seen a little bit of it 2 weeks in a row. But again, 16 points. I mean, and I realize he yanked an extra point. So 17, but either way, we're still having the same conversation.
One group I want to talk about, Vince, I want to talk about the linebackers.
Yes.
That was a group that I wanted to get a chance to really dive more into after watching the game. Because during the game, I kind of focused on the secondary and the front a lot, not the linebackers.
Sure.
That was one of the areas I know you keyed in on when you broke the game down.
I did.
Overall, what did you think of the play of the linebackers? Because we didn't talk about them a whole lot last night. What did you think of the play of the linebackers from last night?
So first half, I thought they played pretty darn well, to be honest with you. I was very impressed. I thought as a group, the linebackers dropped into coverage with a purpose more this week than they have in the past. And that's huge because we were banging on those guys for at times not dropping with a purpose. And what I mean by that is when you're dropping into zone, don't just go to an area. Right. You have to go, but you have to have your head on a swivel. When a guy comes into your zone, you've got to take a man-to-man until he leaves your zone. And then you got to communicate with the guy next to you, et cetera. And they weren't really doing that. And that was a problem for me. They would just kind of be there. Now, there were a couple of times where a guy got loose, and was able to find. But guess what? Drake London's a really good player, and he's able to find some holes in the zone. And there's always going to be holes in the zone. You just don't want it to be consistently.
Right.
So I was actually impressed with a lot of their drops. I was impressed with Isaiah Foskey and his drops. He had his head on a swivel a lot.
By far his best coverage game. And that's why I said last night, this is why this would be the first film I'm sending to every NFL team.
Yeah.
Whenever he decides to leave, unless he has like a 5-sack game or something like that. This is the
absolutely.
Because again, he had 2 strip
sacks.
Pretty big deal.
But he dropped with a purpose.
Yeah.
And he was getting under routes.
That was the thing, Vince. I noticed he was actually finding receivers. He's never done that before. And still not great at it. I mean, there was one play where they ran a seam route and he ran with the guy and they kind of settled in. He's gonna have to get better. but he still got way more depth to where I don't think the quarterback was
Right.
comfortable trying to fit that ball over top of him and under in front
Absolutely.
of the safety.
And I'll say the same for Bo Bauer. I thought he actually dropped with a pretty good purpose tonight.
By far his best coverage game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was actually impressed with Bo. There was a couple of times where Drew Brees was talking about, he had a play from behind, right? From behind the quarterback, and he was talking about how Slovis was going to his third option. He was, here's option 1, here's option 2, here's option 3. Option 2 almost every time was Bo Bauer being underneath the receiver, and he was covered. And so he had to go to option 3, right? I was actually pretty impressed with Bo Bauer in this game. From a run game standpoint, the first half, I thought they were really good. They didn't have a lot of opportunities, but they were flying to the football. They were getting into gaps and causing USC to not be able to run the ball. I thought in the second half, two things. Number one, I felt like they were in dime a little bit more often than they were in the first half, and that prevented the linebackers from making plays because they weren't on the field for the most part. And number two, the defensive line was somewhat allowing USC to get to the second level with their offensive linemen. And I'm not necessarily blaming the defensive line. I think I'm actually going to give props to the USC offensive line for doing a better job of getting to the second level. But I thought that the linebackers were having to fight off more blocks in the second half.
I think part
than they
of
had
it was
to do in
the
the first
USC
half.
line. I think the Notre Dame defensive line also didn't play well. They were hitting and stopping a lot more in the second half.
Right.
I thought.
So there you go. So you saw what I saw then.
There was also some missed tackle opportunities. I mean, there was a play where Keontae Ingram rushed for like 6 yards, and Jason Adamiola had a chance to hit him in the backfield. And a couple times they
there was one. I was gonna say there was one time where both linebackers went to the right, and they kind of followed each other. And I don't know if they were going to the same gap or if they were going to like C and D, but they both went to the right, and the run came to the left. From the defensive standpoint. And so I don't know if that was a miscommunication or
we've
they were
seen
both
that a few times this year. I got to think that's a miscommunication because we don't
that's
see it
my
enough
thought too.
Yeah,
because they vacated the entire left-hand side.
We don't see enough of that for me to think that's a play call.
So,
and normally what you would see is you'd see a safety rolling right down where they left.
Right, and there wasn't. It was completely vacated. And now Houston Griffith ended up coming up and making that play, but he came from a safety depth. Right. So he wasn't replacing.
There you go.
Yeah. He wasn't replacing. He was just making a play because there was nobody to make it.
Something also I think that gave Notre Dame problems in the second half, and it started a little bit in the second quarter, is I thought USC did a good job of saying, hey, they're whooping us up front. We got to go. We got to go fast. They did exactly what we've been talking about the Notre Dame offense doing, and it forced Notre Dame to be more line up and play. Because there were several times, I think, especially in the third quarter, where they were snapping the ball and Notre Dame was barely lining up.
I agree.
And that was a really good halftime adjustment by USC, in my opinion. Now, Notre Dame buckled down and got into the red zone. And really, the red zone defense was the biggest part of this game. And that's where you saw Marcus Freeman turn the heat up. They got into the red zone.
Too. He was bringing 6 at times. I mean, that was great.
Because you're not worried about anybody throwing the ball over your head at that point in time.
Exactly.
And so I thought the red zone game plan was really effective. But I thought overall the second half from both the offense and defense was a little bit disappointing. And to me, that was my big takeaway from last night is we just didn't see this team have that killer instinct. And I know some people hate that phrase, and I don't love it, but I don't really know how else to call it. That just, hey, we got them on the ropes, let's bury them. And honestly, that starts at the top because Brian Kelly doesn't have that mentality.
No, he takes
you listen to the second half speech, and it was like, it's like that was kind of gross. Like it was kind of like, don't screw this up. Kind of thing.
Right. It really kind of was,
And they played like that. And you could tell they went away from what worked in the first half on both sides of the ball to a degree. They were just way better than USC in the second half as far as talent-wise. But I think, too, is I think overall, if you really break down the numbers, outside of those 2 mistakes by Clarence Lewis that gave up combined 73 yards by Drake London on 2 catches, if you really look at it, his other 13 catches went for 98 yards.
Yeah.
He had a catch he had a double move where he beat Clarence for 44 yards, and he had that. So we broke the cover 2 mistake down last night, right? We explained that. So we don't need to do that again.
So that's 7 yards a catch.
Right.
I mean, 7.5 yards.
13 catches for 98 yards. Like, that's a good running game. That's not a good receiving game.
That's right.
So outside of those two big plays, Drake, this was my point last night. You can't let him wreck a game because that 44-yard gain set up a score, right? And that was the thing I thought they did a really good job of last night is they didn't like bracket him a ton.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of did some things where they would just kind of play Clarence Lewis inside of him. They tried to do it from a more normal alignment in the first half, and a couple times Clarence did a really nice job of, like, there was a third down where he just beat Drake to the slant spot.
Right,
it's a good play.
Sure.
But overall, I thought that they were just, hey, we're just going to take that away in the second half, and I thought that was a good game plan by them. But they were just kind of like, look, what we're going to have to not let him do is beat us deep, and that was really what it came down to. And then the only other time that they beat him deep was a play where J.D. Bertrand got beat up the seam by a tight end. And we talked about this last night. It was good coverage. It's just a great ball and a great catch.
Yeah.
That's one of those ones where it's kind of like, you say to the other sideline, well done.
Right? Good execution.
You got us. Right.
He was there. There's no two ways about it. He was there. So, and that just goes, further to our point about the linebackers being pretty good in coverage.
Right. They had a solid night. But I think the tempo was an issue for Notre Dame, and I think the tackling were the two biggest issues. Beyond that, Vince, my final piece is that they're going to have to get better at the other cornerback spot. And, I mean, it's week after week after week after week. And, hey, it's not getting any easier. It's not going to be easier next week when you play North Carolina.
No.
North Carolina doesn't have a 1 as good as Drake London.
But they're more balanced.
They got a 2, a 3, and a 4 that are better than the 2, 3, and a 4 at USC.
Right.
Brendan Armstrong of Virginia's on pace for like 5,300 yards this year. It's insane. It doesn't get any easier.
Yeah.
And so he's going to have to play better, or they're going to have to figure something out on how to protect him. I don't know if they don't want to go to a freshman. They don't think those guys can play. I don't know, but you can't just – and it's not fair to Clarence because Clarence isn't a man cover guy. That's just not who he is. So either A, you got to adjust your defense and just be more of a zone team, and you put Clarence in position to do more what he does well, or B, you're going to have to put somebody in there that fits what you want to do because they can't keep – and I don't blame Clarence. You're asking him to play a certain style that he's just not – he was recruited to play Clark Lee's sort of off-man Julian Love type of coverage.
Which is why – he will make a good safety if they move him there.
He was a pretty good player last year. I mean, he was better in coverage last year than he is this year because it was a scheme that fit his skill set. And that's just something they're going to have to figure out. Like, you're going to have to consider giving Ryan Barnes or Phillip or somebody a shot, or you're going to have to change what you're doing. You can't keep putting him in that position. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. Any other thoughts from the defense, Vince?
Well, you pretty much said what I wanted to say about Clarence Lewis. I want you to address specifically. Saw a lot of comments about why didn't Cam Hart just shadow Drake London? What's the thought process behind that from a defensive coordinator spot?
Well, there wouldn't have been anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just a couple things about that. Number one, it's really hard to shadow a guy with one player because wherever you line up, Cam Hart's going to alter what you call. And I think number one, number two, you're going to ask Cam Hart to do things against Drake London in spots where Drake plays in the slot a lot, for example, whereas Cam doesn't play in the slot. There are technique differences between playing in the boundary and playing to the field. And so you have a cornerback that now in Notre Dame's defense, not in every defense, in Notre Dame's defense.
Right.
So then on one play, okay, gee, I'm to the field now. I have this call. And my fear is since it's not something you normally do, you run the risk of he just has to get one call wrong or one technique thing wrong, and it's a 60-yard touchdown.
Right, because you're essentially asking him to play 3 different positions if you're going to have him shadow.
Right, and the boundary corner's responsibilities are different from the field corner and the slot and all those different type of things.
Right.
And to me, you're also talking about a kid who made his 7th career start last night?
Correct.
Now, in a year or two, maybe I would think about having Cam do that. I'm not having Cam do that in Game 7. I think the other part, too, is the fact that they had Cam basically shut down the other side of the field, which is exactly what happened. he gave up one off coverage pass on a bootleg early in the game, and
it
then
was
they
like
tried to
his
throw
first quarter.
Yeah, and then they tried to throw at him. It was like on a scramble, and the guy came, just wasn't even really him getting beat.
Yeah,
and then they tried to go at him later in the game, and they couldn't do anything about it. He basically took away half the field, which allowed them to kind of play over the top of Drake and take the deep ball away all game, with the one late exception. So I think it was, we're going to let Cam shut down whoever he's playing, and then we're just going to kind of high-low Drake all night to make sure he doesn't hit the deep ball. I think it's a sound plan. I think there's a lot of reasons why this is not the year you want to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not a huge fan of that anyway, to be honest with you, because to me, as an offensive coach, if you're going to have a cornerback shadowing my best player, and I'll tell you, I've used this example before. When I was at Duquesne, we were playing a team. I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was Jay Bateman's team. I'm trying to remember who it was. But we were playing a team, I think it might have been St. Peter's, where basically our speed guy, Yarden Brantley, wherever we figured this out after a series, wherever he would line up, they would put a corner and a safety. So he actually had a safety mirroring him. And so they either have the nickel or they didn't have the corners, but the safety would mirror him. So wherever we lined up Yarden, they were going to put two guys over top of him. Well, we kind of figured out, okay, pretty quickly. I was like, hey, coach, this is what they're doing. And so what we did was we manipulated them the rest of the game. We ended up having like 600 yards of offense. One of our receivers had like 10 catches for 120 yards. Another one had Michael Warford had like 6 catches for 150 yards. I mean, so if we wanted to hit a double combination to the field, we just put Yarden backside, and we knew they were going to have basically 3 guys backside. If we wanted to hit an outside shot and we wanted to occupy that safety and bang a post over top of it, we put Yarden right in the slot, put Michael outside. That safety would be just eyeing Michael or eyeing Yarden, and Michael would beat him over top for a touchdown. And we just could toy with him the whole game.
Right.
Now, that was a bad team, right? And Notre Dame's not a bad team. But having said that, the point still stands in that if I know you're going to take Cam Hart wherever he's going to go, then I'm going to manipulate that to get some other opportunities, number one. Number two, they motioned with Michael Warfield so much, it would have been almost impossible to have Cam always in position to be over top of him. Some of the catches he made last night, they put him in like a wing position behind the line and had him release. I'd rather just let him catch a 4-yard route and tackle him. Yeah, you don't need to have Cam Hart doing that. And what they would have done is they would have done things with Drake London where they would have used him as a decoy more to then open up some other big play opportunities again by the other players. That's the way I look at it. So I wouldn't have blamed them for putting Cam on Drake London, but it's not what I would have done, to be honest with you. In that regards, I had no problem with them not making that decision.
Okay. I just wanted to get that out there because we had a lot of people talking about it.
Do you disagree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Completely agree. I don't think Cam, as good as Cam is doing, and as much faith as I have in Cam, I do not want to put him in a position to have to know and understand 3 different positions in one game.
Yeah,
it's one thing to move him to the field for the entire game, so he's just worried about that one position. Then maybe the next game you move him over to the boundary. Okay, he only has to focus on one thing, though. You know what I mean? Not 3 different positions all in one game. That's too much right now for him. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And then again, it does not take a rocket scientist offensive coordinator to work against that kind of a strategy, as you had mentioned. So I agree with that completely. My final thoughts on the defense were I appreciated the fact that Marcus Freeman was willing to kind of go outside his comfort zone to win the game. And because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Again, there were execution issues that need to still be cleaned up, but being able to overcome the loss of your best player as well, I think is big. And so I'm not as upset with the defense as maybe I was last night after watching it back, but they still need to get better and they still need to clean up some of that stuff for sure.
Which I think says a lot about how good they were last night. And again, part of that was USC made mistakes. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's the whole point. If you give USC enough opportunity, you give them enough rope, they're going to hang themselves. Right?
Yeah,
Isn't
exactly.
that the old expression?
Yeah,
and that's exactly what they did. And then the other thing too is we have a red zone plan. That's what we looking at from a coach. We have a red zone plan,
right?
that we know you can't stop, because then it becomes about our line versus your line.
Correct.
And
that's
USC did a nice
win.
job in that the touchdown drive they had late, is they didn't give Notre Dame an opportunity to get into that red zone because of the tempo. They just went.
Right.
And it was harder for Notre Dame to get into that. And that's
where tempo can help you.
That was the biggest takeaway for me, was they didn't adjust quick enough to the tempo, especially in the red zone. And that allowed USC to kind of claw back into that game a little bit. Vince, before